Good afternoon. You're listening to Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home. We now bring you Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, with Roy Showman.
Hi, this is Roy Showman, and welcome again to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, the show on Radio Maria that celebrates the Jewish roots of the Catholic faith, of the Catholic Church, or seen the other way around, and actually the way I prefer to see it, that celebrates the full realization of all of the promise and potential of Judaism in the Catholic Church and her sacraments, since Judaism was essentially all about bringing about the incarnation of Christ and making the way, so to speak, for the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is quite logically the fulfillment, the fruition, the flowering of Judaism into its ultimate state. That is to provide salvation for all of mankind in between the coming of Christ to the second coming. That is, of course, the Catholic Church and her sacraments. Well, today I'm going to do something a little bit different, but it'll be more tightly tied to the Jewish origins of the Catholic Church than some of my recent shows have been. Earlier this week, I was invited to be a guest on a podcast interview that came out of Lebanon, which was very touching to me, since Lebanon is virtually part of the Holy Land, or certainly adjacent to the Holy Land, and was the cradle of Christianity. And the interviewer basically had me on to give my witness testimony. So since it's been quite a while since I've shared my witness testimony on this program, and undoubtedly some of you haven't heard it, I thought I would play that interview as the show today with a little spin, which is that I will break the interview about halfway through and take calls if any of you have any questions about what I am describing in my witness testimony. So you might want to make a note of the number here to call in with questions or comments. It's 866-333-6279. which is the same as 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. And if you use Skype, you can Skype Radio Maria USA Studio. And about halfway through the program, I will stop the recorded interview and see what's on the phone lines and take questions or comments. And I am not shy about anything. So if there's some somewhat personal question having to do with my experience, I'm happy to try to answer. So with that, I will simply go to the recording. The host of the recording has a YouTube channel called Apostolate of the Immaculate Heart, if I'm not mistaken. And that's where the interview in its fullness can be seen on YouTube. But for now, this is radio, so you won't see it in its fullness. You'll just hear it in its fullness. But you have the advantage of a live call-in opportunity. So here we go, if I've got the tech working, with the interview in which I give my witness testimony with the interviewer, whose name is Alex Blanco, and his program, his channel is the Apostolate of the Immaculate Heart. Here goes.
Welcome, Roy Showman. It's such an honor to have you with us. And I thank you so much for accepting this invitation. It's such an honor. I heard your story many times, and every time I hear it, it's really inspiring. And I think it will help a lot of people to be inspired by the faith, by the work of God in our lives.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me, and I hope so.
Can you share with us your conversion testimony, like what happened to you, and also a little bit of your background, like?
Sure. Okay. My background: I'm Jewish. I'm in the Catholic Church. I've long since been baptized and been a daily communicant and so forth. But I still consider myself Jewish. I don't know how many Jews you know, but it's awfully hard to be Jewish and just think you've stopped being Jewish. So I consider myself a Jew in the Catholic Church. But anyway, I was born and raised very Jewish. My parents were both German Jewish Holocaust refugees. They had both been born and raised in Germany and escaped in the relatively early days. My father escaped in the very early days of Hitler, but my mother got caught up more in the Holocaust, but she eventually escaped. And they independently made it to the United States, where they met and married, and I was born. So I was basically born in the immediate aftermath of the Holocaust. And I was, as I said, I was raised Jewish. And the reason I bring that up about the Holocaust is because, it wasn't really animosity, but there was far more separation between the Jewish community and the Christian community in those days, immediately coming out of the Holocaust. There was more anti-Semitism in the ordinary world in the United States, and there was more fear of Christianity, let's say, within the Jewish community. So they didn't mix nearly as much as they mix today. And growing up, all my friends were Jewish. All my parents' friends were Jewish. Basically, the world that I grew up in was kind of Jewish. I went to Jewish religious education from the beginning of school until university, alongside the ordinary secular school. And I went to MIT, which is a science engineering university. I think maybe the best in the world, or at least it was in those days. And now the best in the world is probably in China someplace anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway, and I lost my faith. I was quite devout, pious growing up, Jewish, of course, and God was very important to me. But when I got to university, I basically got brainwashed into the pseudoscientific view that science is just a kind of superstition that man came up with that religion is only a kind of superstition that man came up with until he had science to tell him, to explain all the mysteries in truth and so forth. So I actually, when I was at university, was kind of convinced that one could not in good conscience believe in God. I wanted to believe in God, but I thought that you weren't allowed to because it was like too disproven, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, which is a really tragic attitude. And this is besides the point, but I did do a video series on YouTube on my channel, which is called Jewish Catholic, not the Jewish Catholic, but just Jewish Catholic, all one word, called Science and Faith, because in fact, science proves the faith. It doesn't disprove the Catholic faith. It proves the Catholic faith. Anyway, so I lost my belief in God at MIT, at university. And after a few years working as a computer scientist, I went to Harvard Business School and to get an MBA. And I did well enough there that they recruited me for the faculty. So I found myself as a professor of marketing at Harvard Business School at the age of 29. And that's really where my witness testimony begins, because that's really when the bottom fell out of my world. All my life, since I was a small child, I knew there has to be a real meaning and purpose to life, which I thought would come from entering a personal relationship with God, which I thought would happen when I was older. I literally thought it would happen at my bar mitzvah, which is when the child is 13. I can say when the boy is 13, because actually by Jewish law, it's only supposed to be boys, but the world we live in, so now it's girls too. But anyway, when the boy is 13, there's a ceremony in synagogue and he enters religious adulthood. And I really thought at my bar mitzvah that the veil would drop and I would enter into a personal relationship with God. But when that didn't happen, it was actually one of the saddest days of my childhood. But then pretty soon I decided the real meaning and purpose of life would come when I got a driver's license, like many, 16-year-olds. And, when I left home, or if I got into MIT, or when I began my career, or if I got into Harvard Business School and so forth. So I kept looking to external successes to give my life meaning. But I was already at this point more successful than I ever expected to be, being a professor at Harvard. But life still had no meaning or purpose, right? We're just a chemical accident. we live for 80 or 90 years and we die and that's it. There's no meaning or purpose to anything. Things just happen in our lives. It's just a very dreary prospect. And so I actually fell into the worst despair of my life at that point. Life had no meaning, but there was no longer anything I could imagine in the future that might give my life meaning. And it was in that state I was walking in nature early one morning when I received the most spectacular grace of my life. I was just walking along all alone in this beautiful nature preserve, when from one moment to the next, the veil between the spiritual world and the physical world disappeared. And I found myself in the presence of God. I found myself looking into the spiritual world, but that wasn't really the most important part. I found myself in the presence of God in a state of very intimate communion and communication with God, such that any place I put my mind, any question I asked myself, I was shown the answer to. And also in a state of incredible intimacy with God. So I learned so much in this experience, needless to say. First of all, I was looking back over my life as though I had died, and was looking back over my life in the presence of God after I died. So I understood how I would feel about everything after I died. I understood that my two greatest regrets after I died would be every hour I had wasted doing nothing of value in the eyes of heaven, and all the time and energy I had wasted worrying about not being loved, when every moment of my existence I was held in an ocean of love greater than I ever imagined could exist, coming from this all-knowing, all-loving God. I understood, I saw that everything that had ever happened to me had been the most perfect thing that could be arranged, coming from the hands of an all-knowing, all-loving God, not only including those things that had caused the most suffering at the time that I thought of as the greatest disasters, if only that hadn't happened, then I would be happy today, or if only that hadn't happened, then I would be happy today. I saw nothing could be further from the truth. Absolutely everything that had ever happened to me had been the most perfect thing that could happen to me, that was arranged by this all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving God, who not only arranged everything that ever happened to me, but had been watching over me every moment of my existence and caring about me every moment of my existence, as though I were the purpose of all of creation, actually, as though I were the only person he had ever created. And as though in a very real sense, everything that made me happy made him happy, and everything that made me sad made him sad. That was by far the biggest part of this experience, right? There's never any reason to be anxious about anything. Absolutely everything that happens is arranged perfectly by God himself, right? Who created everything that exists, that sustains existence itself. It's not like anything is outside of his control, and he cares about me more than I care about myself. Anyway, so there was never any reason to be anxious about anything. And most particularly, there certainly was never any reason to care about whether one is being loved or not, because the whole time one is being loved more than one could ever imagine by God himself. So I knew the meaning and purpose of my life is to worship and serve my Lord and Master and God, who was revealing himself to me in this experience. Any questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, when you said that you saw that the biggest regret would be to waste time and not do what is mostly valuable in the eyes of God, what did you feel was the most valuable thing in the eyes of God? Okay,
two things about that, maybe three. One is the way I thought of it at the time was most valuable in the eyes of heaven, because I had this sense, I don't even know how to describe it, but I had this sense, I was seeing into the spiritual world, by the way, which is part of it. But, we are being, every action, every moment is being observed and recorded. And every action has a moral content that's being observed and recorded for all eternity. And it's as though there's this huge cloud, of witnesses, like observing us. And we will be rewarded for all eternity for anything we do that's of value in the eyes of heaven. So that's how I perceived it. I didn't perceive it as I was in a state of communion with God, and I definitely perceived that everything in my life was arranged by God as a person. But the sense of being valuable in the eyes was more the sense of being, being valuable in the eyes of heaven. Now, I had no idea. I mean, it's not like, I don't know how to put it. A question I asked myself at the time, I was shown the answer to. A question I didn't ask myself at the time, I wasn't shown the answer to. Something I didn't wonder about at the time, I was not necessarily shown the answer to. So I don't have a formula. I have a formula now because I'm a well-catechized Catholic about what's of value in the eyes of heaven, the spiritual acts of mercy, the corporal acts of mercy, and so forth. But that's not how I was thinking at the time. Okay. At the time, I understood that the meaning and purpose of my life was to worship and serve my Lord and Master and God, who was revealing himself to me. What actions were serving him, I didn't think about. I'm interrupting myself here for a second. You're listening to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria with me, your host, Roy Schoeman. And I am playing a recording of an interview I did for another YouTube show earlier this week. But you just saw the host or heard the host ask me a question. And my intention in playing this is perhaps for listeners, if they have any questions, to ask me questions. So about halfway through the hour, I will take a break again and interrupt myself, so to speak, and take any calls that come in with questions. The number here is 866-333-6279 or 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y, or if you Skype, Radio Maria USA Studio. And I look forward to the possibility of answering any questions you might have about my conversion, about the witness testimony, about what I learned in that experience, anything that's come up in this interview that you're listening to until the point where I stop halfway through the hour. And then I'll continue with this. It'll get into the second half of my witness testimony, and then I'll have time after that also and take any calls with questions that have come up then. The second part has more to do with Mary. This first part has more to do with God, with big G, whatever that, well, never mind. What everything that means. You'll hear more as I go on with the witness testimony. So if you want to jot down a question as it comes up, then when I break to take questions, you're more than welcome to present it to me. So with that, I'll go back to the recorded interview. What actions were worshiping him, I did think about, because I know what worship is. Even as a Jew, I knew what worship was. So at the time, my concern was to know who this God was and what religion to follow so that I could worship and serve him properly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure.
So I actually prayed as I was walking. I was still walking. I was 100% conscious. I prayed as I was walking along, let me know your name so I know what religion to follow to worship and serve you properly. I didn't think of this religion as Judaism. I didn't think of this God as the God of the Old Testament. I couldn't think of him as the God of the Old Testament. That's a really interesting issue because it's not because the Old Testament is wrong. The Catholic Church teaches very explicitly that Old Testament as well as New Testament is sacred scripture, and it is the divinely revealed word of God. The Jews didn't get it wrong. They got some things wrong, but they didn't get it wrong wholesale, so to speak. the truth is, the entire relationship between God and man was transformed by the incarnation of the second person of the Most Holy Trinity as a man. That was the whole point of Judaism. There is a prophecy in the Old Testament, I think it's Joel, where the Lord says, the day is coming when you won't have to run to this person and that person and say, tell me about the Lord, because I will reveal myself to the lowliest manservant and maidservant among you. St. Peter cited that prophecy in the first Pentecost sermon. That's what happened when Christ came. In the Old Testament, God only spoke to the prophets and the patriarchs and the priests. He did not speak to the ordinary people. He didn't even speak to King David. King David had to go to a prophet to find out what the Lord was angry with him about and what he was supposed to do about it and so forth. And that was the God I grew up with. And because that was the God of the Old Testament. Jesus, when he came, Jesus had a true divine nature, a true human nature in one person. In the combination, it's called the hypostatic union of the human nature and the divine nature in one person, the divine nature and the human nature flowed together like, water and milk into a pitcher. And ever since then, human nature has participated in divine nature, at least potentially, in a way that had not been available before Christ. Anyway, that's all by way of saying, I didn't think of this as Judaism. So I prayed as I was walking along, let me know your name so I know what religion to follow to worship and serve you properly. I don't mind if you're Buddha and I have to become Buddhist. I don't mind if you're Krishna and I have to become Hindu. I don't mind if you're Apollo and I have to become a Roman pagan, as long as you're not Christ and I have to become Christian.
Oh.
This is because of the chip on the shoulder I had against Christianity. And he didn't reveal his name to me, but I went back home happier than I had ever been all my life. I knew there was no reason to be anxious about anything. I knew we lived forever. I knew that every hour had this infinite potential meaning, because it had the potential for us to do an act that was a value in the eyes of heaven, for which we would be rewarded for all eternity and so forth. I instantly lost interest in anything that wouldn't mean something to me personally 1,000 years from now, right? It didn't make any sense. It was as though all my life I had been playing a game of Monopoly, greedily accumulating this brightly colored Monopoly money, when right next to me was a huge stack of solid gold coins that I had been ignoring. And now my focus was shifted to those solid gold coins. Now, I don't want any anti-Semitic comments about how Jewish this revelation was. But anyway, so that was basically that was really the main part of my conversion. I still didn't know that it was Christ. I still didn't know it was Christianity. Certainly didn't know it was the Catholic Church. But that totally reoriented me from top to bottom.
I can imagine. And why did you have this, why did you reject the idea that it might be Christ?
Okay. First of all, I want to make very clear, I had no animosity. I had no negative feelings about Christians or Catholics. The one other student at MIT who I really wanted to be my roommate, and I had to move heaven and earth to get him to be my roommate, was a devout Catholic from the Midwest. This had nothing to do with any animosity towards Christians, because sometimes that's misunderstood when I give my witness testimony. However, Christianity to me was the cause of the last 2,000 years of suffering of the Jewish people. Jesus, to me, in my understanding at that time, was a false Messiah who claimed to be the Messiah but wasn't. His followers developed this religion that made the Jews out to be the great villains of the world, as a result of which Jews have been persecuted for the last 2,000 years. So actually, Christ was the villain of history, so to speak. Certainly the villain of Jewish history.
Okay.
And the Holocaust, we could debate whether Christian teaching played a role in the Holocaust or not. And that is a debate I actually like to debate. But that's irrelevant to this issue, because in the Jewish world I grew up in, the Holocaust was seen as a indirect outgrowth of Christianity.
Okay. So it created a sort of sensibility, I can imagine.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And whether that was well grounded or not, nonetheless, this is subjective. I mean, I'm not giving general principles. I'm answering the question about why I felt that way.
Okay. And when you had this sort of revelation, I heard in one of your testimonies you say that you went into New Age also, like you got immersed in.
Well, here was my problem. My problem was I just had this experience.
Yeah.
It was a mystical experience.
Yeah.
I had never heard of mystical experiences. I didn't know they existed. Literally, I didn't know revelation existed since the days of the Old Testament. I didn't think miracles existed. I didn't know miracles existed since the days of the Old Testament. But here I am. I come back home, Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the late 80s, having just had this mystical experience and caring about nothing other than finding out more about it, who this God was and what this meant and all the stuff, what religion to follow. So what can you do except find a mystic to try to teach you something, tell you something more about what happened? So that's what I did. And I'm sorry, but the only mystic I could find was involved in the New Age. I mean, where else are you going to find a mystic?
Yeah.
So he kind of pointed me towards all kinds of stupid New Age stuff. And I spun my wheels for about a year looking into that stuff. But thank God I was doing one smart thing during that year, which was every night before going to sleep, I would say a short prayer I had made up to know the name of the Lord and God and Master, my Lord and God and Master, who had revealed himself to me that day. And that would be my prayer before going to sleep. And that was enough to result in a year after that first experience, having a very vivid experience of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And that put me on the right path. Now you're probably going to ask me to give more details.
What was this experience like?
Well, I went to sleep after saying that prayer. It was a year to the day after that first experience. And so I also said a prayer of thanksgiving for what had happened a year earlier. And I went to sleep. I thought I was woken up. Now I understand that my body was asleep in bed. But again, subjectively, I thought I was woken up and led to a room and left alone with the most beautiful young woman I could ever imagine. And I knew without being told that it was the Blessed Virgin Mary. And she offered to answer any questions I might have for her. And so I asked her about 7 or 8 questions, which she graciously answered. And then the audience was ended. After the questions and answers, she spoke to me for another 10 or 15 minutes. She said she had something she wanted to tell me about. Or tell me, I should say, not tell me about. And then I went back to sleep. And the next morning when I woke up, number one, I was hopelessly in love with the Blessed Virgin Mary. I couldn't wait to see her again, which I thought would happen that night when I went back to sleep. I had no idea that it wouldn't happen again. But I knew it had been Christ in the first experience. And I knew I wanted to be as fully and completely a Christian as possible. And I knew who the Blessed Virgin Mary was. So those things led me. I did take a detour into a Protestant church because I didn't know the difference between Protestant and Catholic. But as soon as I asked the pastor, what about the Blessed Virgin Mary? And he didn't give her the respect that I knew that she deserved. I knew there's no place for me. And I was spending all my free time at a Marian shrine about an hour from my house, and which of course was held by the Catholic Church. So it didn't take me too long to find my way into the Catholic Church. Okay, well, that is we've reached about the halfway point in the program, and we've reached a kind of a natural break in the witness testimony. So first of all, let me, in case you've joined us in the course of the last half hour, you're listening to Jesus, the Promised Messiah on Judaism. Excuse me, Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria. With me, your host, Roy Showman. I've been playing a recording I made earlier this week of my witness testimony when I was interviewed by a Lebanese YouTube podcast, essentially. The name of that YouTube channel, by the way, I want to give the host due credit, and he's a very faithful Catholic podcast host, and he has some other very interesting witness testimonies on his YouTube channel. It's called Apostles of the Immaculate Heart. Apostles of the Immaculate Heart, which shouldn't be too hard for devotees of Radio Maria to remember, since I hope we're all apostles of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. But anyway, as promised, I'm taking this short break to see if there are any listeners who might want to ask a question or give me a hard time or anything you like. The number here is 866-333-6279 or 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. And I have my eye on the call board now. I see there are no calls at the moment, I don't think. So let me just verify that is in fact true. Yes, that's... Oh, wait a minute. I think there's a call that came in or is coming in. So let me just hold on a second and we'll see who that caller is and what his or her question is. So again, this is Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria. The number here for calls is 866-333-6279 or 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. Okay, I have a question that came in as a written question, so I don't have the voice of the questioner. But the question is, I have a friend who is Jewish. What's the best way to witness to her? And that's a question I love to have. And my answer is usually that let her know what you have with your Catholic faith, and that will make her jealous. In other words, you don't present the Catholic faith as something that she needs in order to make it to heaven, needless to say. But if you let her know how close you feel to God, how close your channel of communication is with God, the joy you get from the sacraments, the joy you get from confession, the joy you get from the Eucharist, from Holy Communion, the joy you get, the peace you get from praying the Rosary, whatever it is, just don't be shy in letting her know what you get from your faith, because she may not be willing to admit it, certainly not to you, and maybe not to herself on the spot, but it's what every human soul is yearning for, and you have it. And if you just let her know what you have, that is going to open a door in her heart, because she's going to want the same thing. So let me see what's... Anyway, so that's my normal answer to that question. It's the best answer that I have for that question. And by the way, it applied to me. It applied to me because however anti-Christian and anti-Catholic I was, I could see the joy and peace that my Catholic friend had, and a kind of being built on solid rock, so to speak, rather than being tossed around by every little wave and breeze. So I wanted what he had, basically, although I thought it had nothing. I didn't know that it was because he was Catholic at the time, but still it opened me up with that hunger to have basically the relationship with God that he has. So anyway, with that, I see we have a live call. I think the caller's name is Nancy. Are you there, Nancy? And what's your question or comment?
Dr. Showman?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Nancy, and I have a similar question. I have a Jewish friend, and she has come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, but I can't get her away. I can't figure out, well, it bothers me that she still dabbles in, she kind of picks and chooses, and she doesn't go to church. She keeps Shabbat, and since I told her about the Eucharist, she consecrates her own bread and wine and believes that it's Jesus, and she has a couple of New Age groups that she participates in, and she does Reiki, and but she is totally committed to Christ as the Messiah. Do you have any suggestions for me? For kind of run out of ideas.
Well, thank you for the question, and my heart goes out to you, and I'm sure that she's going to be getting thousands of prayers as a result of this phone call of yours. It's a very difficult situation because she's inviting a lot of demonic activity into her spiritual life at the same time that she's, inviting Jesus in some sense into her spiritual life. So I don't think the solution is going to be a temporal solution. I don't think it'll be a worldly solution. I think it'll be very much a spiritual solution. So actually, here's my suggestion. My suggestion is give her a miraculous medal. You know about the miraculous medal?
Yes, I do. I wear one.
And get her a nice one and give it to her as a present and tell her about the miracles that are the reason it's called the miraculous medal. And if she can wear that, her days are numbered as a Reiki participant.
Yes.
Whatever happens is going to be from this supernatural side of things. So if you can get her, that's my suggestion, actually.
Right. She does love jewelry. She loves necklaces. She's been witness to a great deal about Mary, and I'll really pray about that, about how to present it to her in a way that she will wear it. Yes.
Sure. I don't know if this will help or hurt, but you might want to read the story of Alphonse Ratisbonne. He was a Jewish man whose conversion came about by wearing the miraculous medal. And there's an account of it in one of my books, Honey from the Rock, but it's also easy to find an account on the web.
Yeah.
Because
he did
there
that
may
as a
be
challenge from a friend, right?
Exactly. And there may be a way of getting her intrigued with the miraculous medal one way or another. Anyway, thanks for your call. And also, I don't know, tread lightly in the sense that there's going to be a lot of demonic opposition to what you're doing. So don't be surprised if there's a little irrational response at times. Your job is to be loving and supportive and act discreetly behind enemy lines, so to speak.
Yes, I understand.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I see we have another call. Jean from Cleveland, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Well, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I do. I did hear part of your testimony once before, but this part, the part where you talked about that mystical experience, would you say that maybe you had maybe something like what the warning is all about, from people that talk about those who have been to Garabandal or, Medjugorje? Would you say that almost sounds like a warning experience when you realize that there were things that you did wasting your time, that kind of thing?
Yeah. No, thank you for the question. And I thought, I've wondered that myself. I understand that the prophecies with respect to the warning are of an illumination of conscience. And I think that the type of experience that I had falls in the same category, because all of a sudden you see things and you know things and are shown things that are completely coming from God, and they're coming from God. So I think the family of experience in that sense is similar. But I have to confess, I was in a state of mortal sin at the time, and I was not shown that, and I was not scared in that experience. I should have been scared. I should have been terrified. of what would have, was waiting for me if I died at that moment. But I was protected from that. I was only shown the good side of things, so to speak, and the love of God and his providence. I wasn't shown how serious sin was. Because frankly, I think I would have probably run in the opposite direction if I knew what a bad state I was in. So it wasn't an illumination of conscience in the way that my understanding is that these Marian apparitions are presenting, where people will be terrified by what's waiting for them if they don't convert. So it was, I think, different in that way.
I think that's probably what drew you in, because of his love and his mercy.
Yes.
Because you really would not have known really what mortal sin was.
That's exactly right.
As culpable.
That's exactly right. I did have a conscience that I was routinely violating, but that is exactly right. I know that if I had known all at once how much my life would have to change, all the things that I would have to give up, which were, at the time, I thought the high points of my life, so to speak, then I think I would have somehow walked away from the experience. That doesn't speak well for me, but it's the truth. Anyway, I think I'd better get on with the witness testimony, because our time is drawing to a close. But I want to thank you very much for your call and your question, and all of your calls and questions. So do I have your permission to say goodbye now, Jean?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for calling, and thanks for listening. And thanks for listening, all of you who didn't call. And now let me once again go back to the interview and get as much of it in as we can in the time that's remaining. So here goes with part 2, so to speak, of the interview.
And can you share some of the questions you asked Our Lady, and like how did it sound like having this conversation with Our Lady?
I see that you're remembering other witness testimonies. I've given details from other witness testimonies. First of all, in some ways, the biggest part of this experience was being in her presence. And just to be in her presence, to be in the presence of the love that flowed from her, was to be, first of all, totally overwhelmed by who she was. And second of all, to be lifted into a state of ecstasy just from the pure love that flowed from her. The first thing she said to me was she offered to answer any questions I might have for her. I will say that although she was perfectly beautiful to look at, impossibly beautiful to look at, even more deeply affecting was the beauty of her voice, the sound of her voice. And when she spoke, it just flowed straight through me, carrying with it her love and lifting me up into a state of ecstasy greater than I ever imagined could exist. And when I found myself in her presence, all I wanted to do was throw myself on my knees and somehow honor her appropriately. In fact, the first thought that crossed my mind was, oh my gosh, I wish I at least knew the Hail Mary, but I didn't. Since the first thing she said to me was she offered to answer any questions I might have for her, I kind of wanted to ask her to teach me the Hail Mary, but I was too proud to admit that I didn't know it. So instead, I asked her what her favorite prayer to her was. Her initial answer was a little bit coy, a little bit sideways. She said, I love all prayers to me. But I was a little pushy, and I said, you must love some prayers more than others. And she recited a prayer to me. She recited it in Portuguese. I didn't know any Portuguese, but later I think I identified the prayer after I met a Portuguese Catholic woman and asked her to recite the prayers in Portuguese to Mary. I think I identified it as, O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee, which was the prayer she taught Saint Bernadette, excuse me, Saint
Catherine.
Catherine Labouré at the Rue de Bac apparition. We've just had the Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes, so I've been soaking myself in Saint Bernadette for the last few days. But yeah, Saint Catherine Labouré, and it's the prayer that's around the perimeter of the miraculous medal. See, there's a miraculous medal.
Yeah,
which the design of which the Blessed Virgin Mary gave to Saint Catherine Labouré.
Yeah.
So and let's see what other questions. Most of the experience, or much of the experience, was being overwhelmed by her presence, and just there's no way to explain that except that I saw in this experience that she was the conduit between divinity and humanity, and that all of the grace that flowed from divinity into humanity flowed through the Blessed Virgin Mary. So anyway, so most of my questions just came from being overwhelmed by who she was. At one point, I asked her, how can it be? How is it possible that you're so magnificent, that you're so glorious, that you're so exalted? How can it be? And she just looked down at me almost with pity and shook her head gently. And she said, oh no, you don't understand. You don't understand anything. I'm nothing. I'm a creature. I'm a created thing. He's everything. And then again, out of the desire to kind of honor her appropriately, I asked her what title she liked best for herself. And her reply was, I am the beloved daughter of the Father, mother of the Son, and spouse of the Spirit. Those were my best questions and answers. Yeah, it kind of went downhill from there. And some of the questions were silly. One of them was incredibly silly that I never repeat. And one of the questions was kind of personal and so forth. But anyway, so it was enough for me to know that this was about Christianity, and knowing that she was the intermediary between divinity and humanity. As a matter of fact, it was very difficult to think of her as human. Very difficult. I mean, you know, when St. John was confronted, St. John the Evangelist was face to face with the angel. He threw himself prostrate on the ground and began to worship the angel until the angel said, get up, that's not appropriate. I'm just a creature like you. And we know that the Blessed Virgin Mary is the Queen of Angels. So, you know, if that's the natural human response in the presence of an angel, how much more so when we find ourselves in the presence of the Queen of Angels. So anyway, so that obviously was enough. That second experience to the Blessed Virgin Mary was enough to lead me fairly directly into the Catholic Church.
Amen. And you directly joined the church?
It took there were a little bit of twist and turn in there. After that experience of the Blessed Virgin Mary, when I woke up the next morning, I knew nothing about Christianity. I had never touched a New Testament, literally, for fear of ritual pollution or something like that. Maybe for fear of being evangelized, who knows? But I never touched a New Testament. The only thing I knew about Christianity came from Christmas carols and seeing Christmas creches at Christmas time. I didn't know the difference at all between a Protestant and a Catholic. So there wasn't much I could do other than open the local phone book and find a local church to go to, which was a Protestant church. But as soon as I felt a little bit comfortable with the pastor, I asked him, what about the Blessed Virgin Mary? And he answered rather disrespectfully, I must say. He was a fallen away Catholic, as it turns out. So I knew this is no place for me. And the other thing I was doing in those days was there was a shrine to the Blessed Virgin Mary about 45 minutes from my house. And there was a shrine to Our Lady of La Salette, in fact. And I would drive up there 4 or 5 times a week just to walk the grounds and to feel the presence of the Blessed Virgin Mary and to kind of commune with her. I still didn't know the Hail Mary, I think, in those days. But nonetheless, I had a kind of mental prayer with her. And that was held by the Catholic Church. And sometimes when I was there, there'd be a Mass going on. And whenever I was around the Mass going on, I was filled with a tremendous desire to receive the Eucharist, even though I didn't know what it was. So anyway, that was enough to lead me pretty directly into the Catholic Church.
It's amazing. So when you became Catholic, did it make sense for you when you studied scriptures and the New Testament? Did it make sense in an intellectual way that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah?
If Jesus wasn't the Jewish Messiah, he was nobody. He was really a nobody. But I think I know what you're inviting me to do. But in any case, it seemed totally obvious to me that I wasn't changing religions, that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, that in fact, Judaism and the Catholic Church were not two separate religions. They were two phases of the same religion. More precisely said, perhaps two phases of the same plan for salvation of all of mankind. A preliminary phase to enable the incarnation of God as man, that we know of as Judaism, and a fulfillment phase to spread the fruits of the coming of the Jewish Messiah to all of mankind through faith in Jesus and the sacraments of the Catholic Church, which we know as Christianity or Catholicism. They weren't separate at all. They were separated only by the transformation of the preliminary phase into the fulfillment phase. Other Jewish converts have referred to it as the transformation when a seed turns into a flower, which is basically what it is, or when a seed breaks forth from the surface of the earth and it reveals itself as the plant. That was the purpose of the seed. So that was totally obvious to me. Okay, well, for better or for worse, I have come to the end of our hour together. You've been listening to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria with me, your host, Roy Schoeman. And you've been listening to my witness testimony, so I want to thank you for indulging me with that. And it's been a great pleasure being with you today. To tell the truth, I always love telling my witness testimony because it reminds me of the infinite love of God and mercy of God and intimacy that God has with all of us. Unfortunately, we generally cannot see that or feel that, but he is closer to us than our own breath, and he loves us more than the most loving mother or doting grandfather, and he pays attention to you and to me and to each other individual as though they were the purpose of all of creation. So with that, I'll leave you. I'm going to go out. I usually play a little bit of music going out, and it may sound a little bit mournful, but I'm going to play the Kaddish, which is a Jewish chant that simply extols the glory of God. And that is the best possible way, I think, to end this show. So thank you very much. And I hope you join us again next week, same time, same place. Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria. Bye for now.